September 12, 2019 meeting of the Williamsburg City Council will come to order. Ms. Burcham, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Maslin?
Here.
Ms. Ramsey?
Here.
Mayor Freiling?
Here.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Here.
Mr. Zhang?
Here.
Before us, we have the council meeting minutes from August 5th, 2019 work session and the August 8th, 2019 City Council meeting. Any corrections?
There is one correction that will be made to the August 12th minutes.
Okay.
It indicated that in attendance was Fire Chief Pat Dent rather than interim Fire Chief Larry Snyder.
With that correction, I'll move to approve. Second.
Ms. Burcham?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons? Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
We have no matters of special privilege today, but several public hearings, and I will turn the gavel over to Mr. Pons for a bit, because as an employee of the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, it is not appropriate for me to participate in the conversation or voting on the first three public hearings.
Thank you. And we do have four public hearings, two of which PCR number 19-14, thank you for turning on my mic, and number 19-15, the applicant has requested these be tabled, and so if there's a motion.
I move that council table PCR 19-014 and PCR 19-015.
Second.
Second.
All in favor? Or unless, I'm sorry, Ms. Bertram.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Abstain?
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
So that takes us to PCR number 13-013.
Thank you.
Murphy.
Vice Mayor Pons and members of council, this is a request of the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation to amend Section 21-2 definitions by adding a definition for private plaza and Section 21-294-8 by adding private plaza with a special use permit in the downtown business district. On the overhead is our proposed definition for a private plaza, which means a multi-purpose area that allows flexibility of space within its boundaries to include planned and passive activities such as festivals, art events, outdoor movies, staged musical or theatrical entertainment, which may also include fountains, benches, temporary installations, including temporary stages, lighting and sound equipment, recreational facilities, outdoor furniture and seating areas, and outdoor seating for restaurants and other eating establishments that surround the plaza. As I mentioned, staff recommends that the private plaza is proposed to be in the downtown business district with a special use permit. On this overhead is the downtown area that shows the B1 district areas, and as you can see, it contains some properties that Colonial Williamsburg owns in the Merchant Square area. It also runs up Prince George Street and Richmond Road, and also the city complex where the library is and where the municipal building is. Planning Commission held a public hearing on August the 14th. They recommended to City Council approval of the proposed ordinance 19-18 to amend Section 21-2 definitions by adding the definition for private plaza and Section 21-294-8 by adding private plaza with a special use permit in the downtown business district. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Murphy. Are there any questions?
Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Murphy. Question with regard to the private plaza definition. Now, on Monday during the work session, for folks who weren't here, the Tourism Development Grant Review Committee, did I get that right? It's long-winded. Committee met and proposed and provided some recommendations to City Council for tourism development funding. Among them was City Square, which I believe you just mentioned is part of the B1 district. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So I know that the funding had requested some sort of temporary staging in that area. And I know also from last month, City Council basically asked staff to look into how we can pull more resources to activate the City Square area because of, increased programming from the library. So would this definition apply for the City Square zoning, issue that might come up in the future?
City Square is a city park.
Right.
So this will not fit
Parks,
with that. Okay.
Yeah, playgrounds, parks, athletic fields owned and operated by the city are allowed in just about all the zoning districts in the city. So this is a privately owned, this is why we had a definition for private plaza to separate those uses.
Staff ever contemplate, maybe this is semantics, or maybe there's some legal bearing, private, public plaza?
Well-
Why not both? Has staff contemplated both uses?
Well, I think we looked at the plaza definition, and we looked at several, looked at definitions in the, on the web, and one of the things that came up continuously was it mentioned things like a square, a marketplace, or similar open space in a built-up area. It also mentioned that it's usually an open space near urban buildings, so we thought that the plaza, the private plaza was a better definition for that than saying a private park. So we just picked plaza as we thought that was appropriate because of the downtown area and the urbanness of the downtown area.
Right, and can you remind me what the process with how staff analyzes these requests? So when I look at different zoning designations, right, there are a list of permitted uses. This one will have to be subject to a special use permit, which is within council's preview, so it's not like,
Right.
You have something, you can go along with it. It has to come before city council with a public hearing. But, I'm assuming it's not the practice that you have an applicant come before you and it turns out there's no private plaza within the definition, so then city staff then considers adding it into
Right.
the definition. How do you guys determine whether
In our
it's a good
zoning
fit?
ordinance, if the use is not listed, it's not permitted. So usually when an applicant would come in, they would say, we're looking at these types of uses. The first thing we would go and look, and in that zoning classification, is determine if that use is permitted, one by right or one with a special use permit. If it's not listed in that category, then we have to say the only way that that's allowed is if you amend the zoning text for that district and go through the zoning text amendment process. In this instance, we looked at the private plaza, and because of its proximity to downtown, we thought it was appropriate that instead of making it a use by right, is making it a use with a special use permit, so therefore council has the option of weighing each applicant on its own merit on a
Understood.
case-by-case basis.
That's all the questions I have now. I may
But
come
if I
back.
could just follow up on that, the difference between a public and private,
It's ownership.
Ownership? Okay. So, but,
Public plaza, the parks and private areas are owned by the city of Williamsburg, is what's in the ordinance. This is, the property that you tabled was an application that was on private property. So it couldn't have a park that, and I think I read you that definition, playgrounds, parks, and unlighted athletic fields owned and operated by the city of Williamsburg. So it didn't fall into that classification.
Thank you, Carolyn, for the presentation. And I have a couple questions, and I just want to confirm that the purpose for this hearing is to discuss a text change and add it to the zoning ordinance.
That's correct.
This is not as approval of a zoning change. It's just a definition.
That's the purpose of this request is to add that private plaza definition to the zoning ordinance and also to allow a private plaza in the B1 district with a special use permit. So that's all that the case 19-13 is doing.
And this came before Planning Commission, I believe, in August. And were there any concerns with the definition by members of the Planning Commission?
There were no concerns with Planning Commission on the definition. They voted 6-0 to approve the request.
To approve the definition. And this is in alignment with the intent of the comprehensive plan, I would assume.
Staff believes so.
And as far as B1, you've got different ones highlighted there. And as you mentioned, some of them are owned by Colonial Williamsburg, some of them are owned by individuals or other entities along Prince George Street. So if this definition is adopted, then one of those individuals could come in and request a special use permit and rezoning for their private property.
They could come in and request a special use permit. Staff would look at it. Planning Commission would make a recommendation to council, and council would then act on that request based on the merits of that request as a special use permit.
And again, to reiterate, it would be done on a case-by-case basis.
That's correct.
It is not a by right. And I think that you all have have a lot of flexibility with the definition that you created. I mean, what comes to mind for me is things like, you know, the Flute Frenzy, if they would want to have a little event in a private plaza or a yoga class or something like that. It would provide a lot of different options and opportunities.
That's correct. We looked at a definition that was broad so that we could have the ability to look at different types of uses on a case-by-case basis.
So, thank you.
Thank you. A couple questions on the definition, if you could bring that up again. So when you look at the definition, it seems like we've already done a lot of these things in that space. What is this allowing us to do that we haven't done before?
This allows an applicant who is a private individual to do something permanently on this, such things as yoga classes, having typical events where there might be a fee to have a dinner on that location, to maybe show movies on a location. So the flexibility, we looked at this definition and tried to create a flexibility, because when the application comes in front of council for a specific location, then council gets to look at the merits of what's proposed for that location and can vote it up or down or modify.
Have we seen any letter endorsing this from the Merchant Square Association?
For the private plaza definition, not to my
Right.
knowledge.
They haven't supported this? In terms of the term private, so we talked about ownership. Do we have many other zoning provisions where it really matters whether it's private or public? I don't really see private in a lot of those definitions.
Well, I think we looked at the definition because we have parks and playgrounds and so forth by the city of Williamsburg. That's usually a public entity. So when we specifically call that out in the zoning ordinance, when we looked at this request, we wanted to distinguish from city-owned property to privately owned property. So that's why we put private plaza in the definition, so that it's very distinguishable, that it's not something that the city owned, or it's not a city plaza or a park or playground that's being created.
Well, using that same analogy, and you look at parking lots, so is P2 and P3 a private parking lot or a public parking lot?
Well, I think
zoning?
the land is private, but I think there's a lease agreement with the city as to the use of it.
So zoning,
Is that correct, Ms.? It's under a lease agreement with the city.
but the zoning provision under which that operates, does it say in that zoning private?
No, I think it says parking lots.
Right, so it's not, we don't need to have
Right.
that
But
determination.
in this instance, we thought that it was important to distinguish between public and private.
So if it's a private park, what restrictions can the owner put on it in terms of access, freedom of speech, things like that?
It's not a traditional public forum, nor would the parking lot as it exists right now be a traditional public forum, because it is not a publicly owned space.
So if public money was actually used to support P3, would the private provision still be that they would be able to restrict freedom of speech there?
We are not talking about a public space, and the fact that there's potentially grant money does not turn it into a public space. Duke of Gloucester Street or Library Square are traditional public forums. They are where, in the tradition of the United States, people have gathered to speak, to protest, to engage in activities of that sort. A parking lot isn't typically a public space for that purpose anyway. And then you add to it that it's not owned by the city of Williamsburg, which makes it not a public space for that purpose.
But before public funds are used, that could be one of the conditions, that we would not restrict constitutional rights?
You can attach conditions to the special use permit which are reasonably related to the use of the property for that purpose. That includes limitations on how the property is used, as long as they reasonably relate to the use of the property for that.
And not arbitrary and capricious.
Yes.
I would offer that if that's something you wanted to do, the proper place to attach that condition would be the Tourism Development Grant Fund process as opposed to the zoning process.
So another question, why are we recommending that we vote on this now in a piecemeal manner, and why not wait until what the other two provisions are actually voted on?
I don't know that there's a reason that we were advocating for it, other than this definition really can be decoupled from what the city council does on the other two applications. This provides a definition that could be used by any entity in those zoning districts that go through the same process after it's approved. So the thought was that this could be approved, and then the other two actions be taken either for or against at a later date.
Well, this might be just, swinging right off the bat, and you may not have an answer. Either one of you guys may not have an answer, but I think there's been some concern, and maybe Councilmember Maslin, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, that there is this idea that we're trying to do it in a piecemeal fashion, that, this definition is really mainly targeted towards Goodwin Square, which it is. We just tabled the two other SUP requests. I guess the question that I have is that for the other zones, and with the Merchant Square, I get your point, but this goes beyond, just the Merchant Square. But I think in terms of the question is, how many other areas could feasibly also apply for this? I mean, I know it's a case-by-case basis, but
Anything in the B1 district that's shown on that map, depending on the application and the scope of the application.
Okay.
Until you get an application in, it's hard to, it could be something smaller, it could be something just as large.
it's all on a case-by-case basis.
Well, and the other thing to
Case by case.
consider is that we're adding this definition to the B1 zone. So everything on that map that's sort of orange in color would be eligible. And when you look at that, you think, well, there's a lot of publicly owned spaces that are included in that.
Like here, yeah.
And that's true, but there's no forecasting what ownership might change hands of those properties. So, it's important to remember what we're doing here is adding a definition to the zoning district. And while the applicant, in this case, is Colonial Williamsburg, it does apply to the zoning district as a whole,
Right.
which includes the properties that they don't own.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
Just one. The question came up as to whether anyone had weighed in one way or, and I guess no one has weighed in on the definition of it one way or the other.
Well, I think you have to look at all the speakers who spoke at Planning Commission and read in between what they were looking at. But
As far as the definition itself of the private plaza.
you could interpret that they didn't want the private plaza definition either. That's hard for me to answer because
Yeah.
all three cases were together when they went
Presented together.
to Planning Commission.
If there's no other questions, I'll go ahead and open the public hearing. First speaker card I have is Sarah Gunn. Would you like to come forward, and if you would state your name and address for the record, and if you please limit your comments to 5 minutes, we'd appreciate it.
Hi, I'm
Hello.
Sarah Gunn. I live at 131 Hunting Cove. And with all due respect, I really think that this proposal should be considered as a whole. We shouldn't be deciding upon anything individually. So I suggest it be tabled until next month. In fact, I suggest that it be tabled indefinitely, because this plan is the plan of the current administration, and we know the president's leaving, and I don't think it is wise for us to saddle a new administration with something that is this controversial. So I think that it's important for Colonial Williamsburg to start looking inward at developing some kind of a strategic understanding or plan to become viable and sustainable in the long term. And there very well may be something in the vision or ideas of the new administration that can take a proposal that's even better suited for the goals of the Tourism Grant Committee. And I know this money is just burning a hole in their pocket and they feel like they've got to spend it, but it'll still be there if this thing is delayed. I really encourage you all just to put a hold on the whole thing until we've got a new administration and a new plan to go forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Next speaker card I have is Tom Cameron, I believe.
Mr. Mayor, City Council, I am Tom Cameron, a resident of James City County, and I reside at 135 Lakewood Drive in Williamsburg, Virginia. I am here to respectfully request that you deny Colonial Williamsburg's application to define and allow private plazas in the Williamsburg B1 downtown business districts with special use permits. It is not clear in Colonial Williamsburg application as to where and what and how many private plazas might be established in the B1 business district and arise out of this request. Nor is it defined as to what, when, or how many special use permits might be sought by Colonial Williamsburg for their undefined private plazas. There is absolutely no empirical data that supports converting parking lots to private plazas will increase tourism, benefit Colonial Williamsburg, or enhance the revenue of the historic triangle. Business decisions resulting in the expenditure of $2 million of taxpayers' money should be made on a value-added basis and a positive return on investment, and not on speculation that tourism might increase and more revenue might be produced. The due diligence to make an informed business decision has not been done by Colonial Williamsburg or the Tourism Development Fund Grant Review Committee in this case. This is purely an instance of run it up the flagpole and see who salutes. All along, Colonial Williamsburg has said that the loss of any parking could be absorbed in other available parking. Yet now Colonial Williamsburg has asked you to table their request for a month to study whether or not converting existing parking into a private plaza can in fact be absorbed in other parking venues. Without credible evidence that converting parking lots to special use private plazas will in fact create additional tourism, I suggest that this would be a misapplication of $2 million of this tax revenue and not meet the intent of the tax, which is to increase tourism. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker's card is Sarah Meldrum.
I'm Sarah Meldrum. I live at 108 Iris Street. And I am here to express disappointment that Colonial Williamsburg requested to table the second two parts of the motion and to express in general my support for the Goodwin Plaza development. I do feel that it would bring value to the community, not only to tourists, but also to those of us who live here with small children. I do live in the city limits and spend a lot of time downtown, in fact, at Blackbird Bakery with my two children every week. And we would greatly enjoy having the splash pad, the cooling option, and also just more space to for them to run around and play. I feel that given the parking studies that the city has already conducted, it's been established that those parking spots are not crucial to parking availability downtown. In fact, that lot is a problem because of its limited entrances. I think it causes actually more congestion because it is difficult to find the entrances and exits. And the space would be much better used as a place where people can relax and enjoy their bakery goods. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Next speaker's card is Lisa Agdon.
Hello, Mayor, Councilman. Thank you for the privilege of speaking. I'm Lisa Octawan. I do live in James City County, 23-mile course. But my husband and I have been business people in Williamsburg for 40 years and in Merchant Square for 30 years. I think that experience gives me a little understanding on what brings tourists here, what brings business here. And based on that, I strongly recommend that you at least table proposal PCR 19-13 until the point that we're ready to see a revised proposal for the whole project of Goodwin Plaza. I feel if we pass this at this point, we're just making it easier for things to move ahead without control, and I think the decisions need to be made at one time for the various proposals. Personally, from a business standpoint and a Colonial Williamsburg rent payer, converting this to a plaza in this particular case will be a negative for business in Merchant Square. As a result, it will be a negative for taxpayer money coming into Williamsburg. We personally have an entrance off of P3 parking, which is a benefit to us in that I would say 2/3 of our local customers come in through that entrance. They love having access.
That's everybody else. And then I'd like us to go to court. I'm not a lawyer, thank goodness, and I never would want to be, but we need to challenge this. We need to take this to our representatives and create a counter proposal that goes before a judge where anybody who's potentially has this conflict signs something, it's reviewed, perhaps supported by the other members of the city council, and applies perhaps to only cities with 40,000 residents, with an employer with over 1,000 employees, because we need to make some sense. This is a new Virginia, and the old Virginia needs to be removed.
Time's expired, so
Thank you.
Thank
I'm
you.
done.
Appreciate it. Is there anybody else? Yes, sir. If nobody else, I'll let Mr. Spangler come back up again.
And Ron Spangler, it's a complicated issue. There's no question about it. And Ms. Trish, are you still here?
Sir, if you would address your comments.
Oh, I'm sorry. David, her husband, and I have bonded. We've traded 4 or 5 emails already, and I'm meeting him next Tuesday. So I express the dialogue, the importance of green space. Everybody loves green space, for golly's sake. But we just need to get together, and this needs to be driven by the city. Not by Colonial Williamsburg, not by the Precious Gem, not by anybody else. There needs to be a comprehensive vibrancy program developed, presented, and hopefully sold to the citizens of this city and the community as well. But
thank you, sir. Having no other speakers cards, I'll close the public hearing and come back to members of council for further discussion.
So I think there is definitely a concern if this proposal were a textual amendment that basically would have been included with the permitted use categories, because then what happens is it's a by right. This proposal by city staff, just to be absolutely clear, belongs to the permitted use if we approve it, but it's subject to SUP. That gives me a little bit more comfort when I look at this textual definition, because any proposal by any of the private owners along that B1 district would have to come before this body, subject to Planning Commission, City Council, public hearings in both meetings before we fairly debate and deliberate the topic at hand. And I kind of look around all the cities. You have public parks, you have private passive parks in neighborhoods. Even I was just looking right before the meeting at our land use categories. The corridor districts have parks of any sort, open space, green space that are permitted uses within the categories. Correct me if I'm wrong, Carolyn. But there are parks, some sort of public space that are included in almost every single land use category already, with the exception of maybe B1 with regards to private plaza. I think today's delay with the SUP, the removal of the parking lot, the consideration of the funding aspect wisely has been tabled so that we can, or let's say delayed, so that we can continue to have these conversations. And I'll be honest, I was one of the folks that remains to have significant concerns about the application. Before Colonial Williamsburg asked the city staff to table the proposals, and I'm glad that they're delayed, and I'm looking forward to seeing what details they may have with regard to this application. That has nothing to do with, moving forward, moving backwards, because even if we approve this definition today, it might still fail, right? The SUP application itself, if it does not meet city staff standards, if it doesn't meet our standards, we can still vote it down effectively. But let's not close ourselves to having an idea of having green space in the B1 district, whether it's in Goodwin Square or some other parcel of property along the B1 district. Every other land use category has already had some sort of allowance for that, and I see no reason why we should inhibit that from happening, especially, I understand that there's a lot of controversial aspects with Goodwin Square, but from an objective standpoint of just considering the textual amendment on its face to a zoning designation has nothing to bear. I think that's how we should consider it. And whether we want to disapprove the Goodwin Square Plaza, we are absolutely open to do that for whatever reasons, and I think it is subject to fair and honest debate once it comes up again next month. So I'm glad we had an opportunity for folks to speak today. I think there are going to be even more opportunities for folks to speak next month when we consider this again on our agenda. So I'm in favor with moving forward with the definition.
And I am also in favor of moving forward on the definition, and I appreciate Councilman Zhang's articulation of the various reasons why and how it is a definition and a zoning text change and allows for any owner within the B1 district to be able to come in with an SUP for private plaza use.
Any comments, Mr. Maslin?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of the speakers that say there's no reason to rush into this, that let's have a comprehensive plan that the whole community can get behind. And my recommendation is to table this proposal.
And so I echo Councilman Zhang. If you look at just this application, PCR number 19-13, it's a textual change to the downtown district, which allows for a plaza to be anywhere in this district. Now, what the rub is, the conversation about converting the P3 parking into a plaza, which is a subsequent application that's been deferred. But that's the hammer, that's the hook. And if we can't, in the meantime, before that comes forward, iron out some of the challenges that we have with parking and access, that's where the project will die. But still, the plaza definition will exist in the zoning district and could, in fact, be somewhere else in that district, and it will have to go through that process of approval. So for me, I don't see that approving this is in any way the camel's nose in the tent, so to speak, on the proposal for the plaza. That conversation is going to happen next month unless it gets deferred again. My hope is that Colonial Williamsburg and city staff will, have lots of conversations about future opportunities in P2 and P4, maybe P6, about expanding parking, who owns that parking, how do we enforce parking there, how that additional parking may relate to the parking garage. All of those things, I think, are up for debate, and I know that there's a lot of work still being done on that. So I'm hopeful by October we'll have some additional information that will help us make a decision on the future of the P3 parking. But that's not the conversation today. Today is the zoning text modification that will allow for a plaza. So I too support it, and again look forward to holding Colonial Williamsburg and the community accountable to what happens in the P3 parking next month.
So I move to approve proposed ordinance 19-13 as recommended by Planning Commission.
Second.
Mr. Vice Mayor, if I may, Ms. Shelton, this is a zoning text amendment for the downtown B1 business district that affects all property owners in the district, which includes at least 2 others beyond the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, which technically does not make it a conflict of interest for me.
You have to make a disclosure. that you work for the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, and nevertheless, you will be able to vote in the public interest, so long as there are 3 or more property owners impacted by the decision, one of whom is a member of the group with which you are involved.
And despite all of that, and despite the impassioned willingness of others to subject me to sanction, fine, or jail time, I would prefer not only to avoid the direct conflict of interest, but the inescapable perception of a conflict of interest because of the close nature between the zoning text amendment and the other 2 items which have been tabled for further consideration. We have enough situations in this country where people seem to flaunt their relationships and their public service and confuse the 2, and I would prefer not to be in that camp. So I will be abstaining.
I'd like to get a clarification, because I've heard from the city attorney before that if Colonial Williamsburg was the applicant, that the mayor would have to recuse himself. Now this sounds like a different opinion.
It's not a different opinion. Colonial Williamsburg was the applicant of all 3. There is one exception for property owners when the matter is one that affects more than 3 people, more than 3 business entities, and the mayor or whomever makes that disclosure. However, the mayor has to make the decision about whether or not he wants to participate on the basis of that exception, and that is on the basis of whether he can make that decision in the best interest of the community.
So we have a motion and a second. If there's no other comments, I'll ask Ms. Bertram to call the roll.
Mr. Maslin?
Nay.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Abstain?
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
This takes us to the 4th public hearing today, ARB 19-044, request of Wells Fargo Bank Trust Manager for the Virginia Haughwout Estate to appeal the decision of the Architectural Review Board to deny the demolition of Bucktrout Cottage located at 300 Bucktrout Lane. Ms. Murphy?
Yes, Mayor Freiling and members of the City Council. On July the 9th, the Architectural Review Board reviewed a request submitted by the Wells Fargo Bank on behalf of the Virginia Haughwout Estate to demolish Bucktrout Cottage at 300 Bucktrout Lane. What I have before you on the screen is a picture of the cottage as it looks as of last week. This is another shot of the little garage or storage shed structure there. And this slide shows the location of it. What I've done is highlighted in dark red the property that's in question. The Architectural Review Board denied the request for the following reasons. The dwelling is over 50 years old, built in 1946, and is eligible to be on the National Register of Historic Places. They also noted that an inspection of the property revealed the dwelling was in pretty good shape in that the roof, trim, and most of the paint looked good. It was noted that the landscape was a little overgrown, but the overall condition of the house looked good. They noted that a goal of the architectural preservation is to retain and restore dwellings unless a compelling case is made for its removal. They stated that the applicant had not demonstrated a compelling reason for the demolition of the dwelling. Therefore, the Architectural Review Board denied the request on July the 9th, 2019 by a vote of 5-1-1. Therefore, staff's recommendation is to uphold the decision of the Architectural Review Board to deny the request for demolition of Bucktrout Cottage at 300 Bucktrout Lane. Since I wasn't at the meeting, I've requested a couple of members from the Architectural Review Board to be here in case you had any questions from them as to what transpired at the meeting. Also, the applicant, Mr. Porte with Wells Fargo Bank, is here to answer any questions you may have of him also.
Do we have any questions to Ms. Murphy before we open the public hearing?
Yes, sir.
I have questions for, go ahead.
I just have one. Are there restrictions on the property for it to be sold or rented?
Not to my knowledge. That would be something to ask the applicant is.
At what point will we be asking the applicant questions?
During the public hearing, I think the applicant's going to speak. He's here.
Actually, I had a quick question. What was the rationale for the one board member who voted for the request?
I would advise you to ask Mr. Spence, the chair of ARB, what partaked at the meeting, because I wasn't present at the meeting, other than I think in your packet I gave you the minutes and several other items, but Mr. Spence may be able to explain that.
Okay. Fair enough.
Okay, with that, we'll open the public hearing. Anybody who'd like to address council on this matter is encouraged to come forward. If you'd please provide your name and address and keep your comments to 5 minutes, that would be helpful.
My name is Louis Portal. I'm with Wells Fargo, the trustee. I just wanted to outline a few items about the cabin. It's a small 900 square foot cabin. It has no historical significance. It was basically built for the sister of the owner at the time to reside. She resided there till she passed away in 2015. So it's been vacant ever since. There's no historical reason why it shouldn't be condemned. The other issue is that all of the value of the property is in the land. There's no value in the actual building. The building itself is worth maybe $70,000. And we spoke to Colonial Williamsburg, and they had no objection to it. In fact, they expressed interest in potentially purchasing the land for future expansion. And that seems like a better use for the community to have them build it out than have a vacant cottage with no significant use.
Thank you.
Are we going to ask questions, sir?
Well, you can wait
Okay.
after the public hearing. Anybody else like to address? Okay, with that, we'll close the public hearing. I'll come back to council if you'd like to talk to any of the members of the ARB who are present or to the applicant.
But just a question to the applicant, if I may.
Sir, if you could come back for a moment to the, thank you. It's just helpful for you to speak in the microphone.
Yeah. Thank you for coming back to the podium and.
Sure. How better?
When you say there's no value to it, can you describe some of the measures that you went through to determine rentability, saleability of that property?
Sure.
I understand that there was an appraisal done. Is that a document that you provided for public to see?
Yes, there is an appraisal, and we did present that. So in the appraisal, the recommendation was the highest and best use was as vacant land. It's a one-bedroom cabin, so there's not a wooden cabin, so there's not a market for it. We tried to rent it, and there was just no interest. Where it's located, it's not a property that will be in demand. It's very limited amount of, it's a one-bedroom, so it wouldn't suit families. It's very limited use.
And when you say you marketed for rent, how did you contact a local agency or?
Yeah, yes, we had a local agent marketed for rent, and there was just no demand.
Right. What, did you set a price on that rent?
Yeah, the rent was $1,000. No demand. And I mean, we were negotiable to other we just wanted some income, and there was just no demand. Where it's located and the way it's a one-bedroom, very limited demand for that kind of.
Right. And do you by chance, or do you have an agreement with Colonial Williamsburg to purchase the land if the house is torn down?
We do not have an agreement. They just expressed, they had no objections to demolishing it, and then they expressed future potential interest for expansion.
All questions I have for you. All right.
So did you also try to sell the property?
We haven't put it on the market for sale. Where it's located, and because it's a one-bedroom, it would be, in my opinion, it would be a difficult thing to sell. We just wouldn't be a lot of demand because of the way it's a very limited. It will have to be a single person. If you look at the structure, it's not something that would be very marketable.
Well, I went back to the cottage a couple mornings ago, and I thought it was a little gem hidden away in a little section of Williamsburg that very few people are aware of. And I would think that there might be a market for it, for someone to purchase it, to live in it. And what is the square footage of the property itself, the whole property?
The lot's about a quarter acre. The property itself is 900 square feet.
Okay.
Small little cabin.
So a quarter of an acre isn't really, I wouldn't think, do a whole lot to Colonial Williamsburg. I mean, they're not going to be able to really do anything with a quarter of an acre, I wouldn't think, but they might.
They might, and I would think it'd be better used than a vacant, building a little wooden cabin that's been vacant for 4 years.
Right.
Yeah.
This is a point of correction. It looks like it's got to be more than a quarter acre. The whole lot, as it extends down into the woods, it's got to be at least 3 acres.
That's what the city
Has it?
real estate assessment says.
The footprint of the building itself is a quarter acre, so maybe it's.
Let me ask this.
Footprint of where the actual fence might be around the structure itself might be a quarter of acre. But if my recollection is on HMS and our tax records, it's over 6 acres when you look at the property that goes down into the ravine, because portion of the property, you can see it on this, the front portion of the property is zoned MS district, and the back portion is zoned single-family RS2 district. So I think the front portion, if you take and try to measure it with the measuring tool, is 2.5 acres, and the back portion is over 4 acres.
Let me ask a question. I mean, and I would advise you to be cautious, council. I mean, you're here in Williamsburg where we treasure and value our historic houses. So, just to simply condemn it for no reason is not really an applicable, in some instances, not an applicable answer. So I'm sure you've restated all the reasons to the Architectural Review Board when you appeared before them. Obviously, they disagreed respectfully by 5-1-0 to 1. So in response to that, I mean, is there any rebuttal that should convince us otherwise to disagree with the ARB's recommendation?
Well, we just think that Colonial Williamsburg would have a better use for that than just simply having a wooden little cabin there. I think that they can make better use, and it would be the community would be better served if it was developed by Colonial Williamsburg.
How did you perform your analysis on best and highest use of that parcel?
Well, the appraiser did that.
Okay.
So, I mean, I can get it to my information, but that was the recommendation of the appraiser.
Okay, thank you.
Can I start my questions?
Sure. We're still questioning the applicant.
Right.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so you talked about you tried to rent it, and I think anybody in this room would not agree with you that nobody would want to rent it. And for you to say that because of the location, a block away from the historic area, we've got so many people looking for workforce housing that there would be a line around this block if it was offered for rent.
Okay.
You offered to provide some evidence of your efforts to rent. Did you ever provide that to the planning department?
We did not.
You mentioned an appraisal that was not provided.
It was provided, I'm sorry. The appraisal was provided, absolutely.
Because I haven't seen it in any of the documentation. I don't think the chair ever even was given an opportunity to look at it.
Okay, I submitted that. It was Aaron Burke. I did submit that. So I have documentation that it was submitted. I have documentation that I did submit.
We haven't seen it. I think those of us who know real estate are scratching our heads to say that the appraisal would say the highest and best use is to tear down something that can bring income. In terms of the property, and now there's a little confusion as to how many acres there are. On the real estate side, it says about 3, but we think it could be more.
Okay.
How marketable is that land?
The land itself would definitely be marketable without the structure on it, absolutely. I mean, I think they'd be demand, and obviously Colonial Williamsburg feels that there's value there.
Have you seen the terrain back there? What do you think would be developed there?
Yeah, I'm not an expert at that. It is, I mean, there's a little pond behind it, so it seems like there's potential for a better use than what it's being used for now.
I mean, this is a narrow piece of property that borders the golf course. How many access points are there to this property other than, because the house itself blocks it, right? Is there another access point around the other side through the Griffin parking lot?
There's not another access point that I'm aware of, not to this cabin.
Okay. What about the maintenance of it? So maybe this is I thought in the city we had a maintenance inspection program, and when I went out there, you could hardly tell the parking lot, and the gate from the parking lot to the house was totally covered with vines. You couldn't even open the gate. There are vines growing over the house. Is that something that's compliance with our maintenance inspections?
Who are you asking the question of, Mr. Haslam?
Planning.
Usually on a property like this, we would look for a complaint on this. Our inspectors are basically looking at properties from the public rights of ways. So unless we got a complaint, we don't typically go down a private driveway to look for something.
Okay, so it does have from the street address in terms of where you're looking at it. What about, looking at workforce housing in terms of someone from Colonial Williamsburg in the trades that could maintain the facility and pay rent, which would cover your real estate taxes and your insurance? What are the real estate taxes?
The assessed value of the land is like $600,000.
Right.
And the building itself is about $70,000.
So is it, the taxes are about 4,000?
Yeah, that sounds about right, yep.
Yeah. So, and CW, we know, charges $1 a square foot for employees to rent, so $900 would more than cover that, right?
Right, and again, we did have it on the market, and there wasn't demand that, we had it, and I'll get the specifics on how long it was on the market, but there wasn't demand at the time.
Yeah. So what are the, this is owned by successors to Virginia Haughwout?
Haughwout was correct.
Yeah, and the significance of that family is what in Williamsburg?
Again, I'm not an expert at that. I know that, I couldn't tell, I'm not an expert at that, so I couldn't tell you that.
Okay, so my understanding is Virginia actually bought Weatherburns Tavern, the print shop. She actually bought Providence Hall.
Yeah, right, correct.
Relocated it from New Kent.
Right.
And the property is all her estate, right?
Correct, and actually Colonial Williamsburg leases the Providence Hall and some of the other sites from us.
Right, so there's the family's got some significance there. So what have we heard from the family members in terms of this action? Do we have anything from them saying that they think it should be torn down?
Yes, they are the ones that are requesting it, and we have an approval from the foundation, the board foundation requesting the demolition. They're the ones that are requesting it because between maintenance, taxes, it's costing more than we're getting out of the property. So that was actually their recommendation that we get it demolished.
So that's always helpful to include in the application, because I was, not seeing that. I was trying to figure out, well, what might the family say?
Right, and I understand, that's such a good question, but yeah, it was their request.
So I went back online, and not to take away from Colonial Williamsburg's new improved ghost tours, but Virginia's daughter, it's interesting in the Daily Press, she had property other places that actually she thought were bought in her name by others. This may be before identity fraud, right? But her instructions were, if the property in her name was undeveloped, that the properties be maintained in their wild, savage, and undeveloped state for the enjoyment of all. But if developed, the properties continue in their present use with this exception, that any house or hotel not needed for personnel be maintained in the spirit of the hostels of Europe for the students and for the artists and for those residents and visitors who have special love of nature, camping, and outdoors. So, absent anything in writing from the owners saying that they want it torn down, it seems like a weak application.
And I want to say that we provided the letter from the board approving the demolition and requesting that as well.
It just didn't get into our package.
Okay, it didn't, okay. Well, I definitely have that.
Yeah, but I think, we're all talking about workforce housing, and I think that we can work with you to find a tenant. I think we can also take a look at the tax assessment to say, to what degree is the land, really marketable? And are the taxes what they should be there? That's all I had.
Other questions?
I would say just real quickly that, you could tell by the title that they were acting on behalf of the families. It's a estate and trust process, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Shelton, but obviously it could have been made clearer, and maybe the evidence of some sort of board approval, would have been helpful, but from a simple estate planning purposes, I guess we can make that clearer next time, but it was mentioned on the application.
We looked at all of their documentation and determined that they did in fact have the authority to file the application in the first place.
Do we have any other questions for the applicant? Sir, I don't want to keep you at the podium. You're welcome to sit down. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Shelton?
Still a public hearing?
No, we closed public hearing.
Just want to make sure.
You're just testing me, I know. Ms. Shelton, help me understand, our purpose here is, as I understand it, is to make a determination as to whether the Architectural Review Board appropriately applied the guidelines related to property demolition of a building more than 50 years old in a historically designated or architecturally protected district, and that's all we do.
That's
and then
correct.
we render a decision as to whether they appropriately applied the guidelines or not.
That's correct.
To that end, Mr. Spence, could I ask you to come forward so we could just ask you a question or two?
Yes, sir.
Would you mind, would you mind answering Ms. Ramsey's question? Or was it Ms. Ramsey? Did you ask a question? Or was it
My-
Mr.
my
Zhang? Mr.
question.
Zhang's question about the lone dissenting vote?
Easy people to mix up.
Yeah, I can't speak specifically for Mr. Stevens. He's relatively new on our board, but, and he didn't express real concern during the discussion and the review. But after I talked to him after the meeting, I got the impression that the sense of functional obsolescence that was presented by the applicant, that, you know, economically or financially, maybe it wasn't a viable property. I think as a realtor, he was sensitive to that. So I think that's what translated into his no vote.
Yeah, thank you for that. I was trying to see if he saw something from the design review guidelines that made him to think that, you know, they should vote for the application.
I think that's where he was coming from.
And the one hook that I could have foreseen that is, you know, even though it's eligible because it's 50 years old to be on the National Historic Register, I was curious to see if he actually would have articulated saying, well, they haven't done it yet, you know, maybe we could go forward with the application. But thank you for staying, Mr. Stevens.
So, Mr. Spence, is it fair to say by your vote that you did not feel that the applicant made a compelling case for removal?
Yeah, if I could just take a few minutes, I'd like to go over again the 7 items that we reviewed and maybe expand a little bit on our discussion and what you have before you. But the first item is whether the building or the neighborhood in which this is located is either eligible for the National Register or is on the National Register. Well, the answer is no, it's not on the National Register, but it certainly is eligible due to the fact that it's 50 years plus old. You know, as it's been mentioned, the house was built in 1946, you know, post-World War II. It was actually designed by Colonial Williamsburg architects, you know, for the owners. And so several of us on the board felt like it had architectural significance. Simple as it is, you know, it fits in well with the neighborhood, if you will. It's not trying to be colonial. It was designed not to detract or to try to compete with the architecture of Colonial Williamsburg. So, you know, it was intentionally designed to be very simple. The historic and architectural value, again, we felt like that it has that. The effect of the demolition on the surrounding neighborhood, again, it's a little bit different of a neighborhood, but it is all part of one compound, if you will, at the time that it was built, because this was built, and then on the same property in the 60s, Providence Hall was brought in and assembled, and it was actually restored by Colonial Williamsburg in the 1970s. And then what was used to be known as Providence Hall Wings, and now it has another name by Colonial Williamsburg, that they leased that property. All that is part of the same foundation's property. So it's, you know, it's contiguous and compatible with those properties. So in terms of being part of the neighborhood, I would say, you know, it's an important part of the neighborhood. The type and quality of the project that will replace the building, it was stated by the applicant that the best use would be to demolish the building and just leave it vacant. And they mentioned that they'd had discussions with Colonial Williamsburg, and Colonial Williamsburg thought that that was a good use of the property. Well, nothing was ever presented to us stating that. Other than the exterior photographs, nothing was really presented to us. Usually when we get these applications, yeah, we'll see exterior photographs, interior photographs. We'll get statements from builders stating the condition of the building. We didn't receive any of that. You know, if you go and look at the building, if you looked at it from a poor, fair, good, very good, excellent condition status, I'd say it's in the good to very good status. It's certainly not poor, and it's better than fair. And then they talk about the economic feasibility of restoring the building. You know, from my eye, having restored many buildings, this looks very good compared to most of the projects that we would see on the ARB or projects that I have worked on personally. I don't see a whole lot of money being needed to make this a viable residence or structure. But nothing was presented to us, nothing, no financial plan, nobody brought any information to us telling us how much it would cost. So.
Other questions for Mr. Spence?
Nope.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
Comments?
Well, I think ARB made a wise and prudent decision ruling on this, and I support their ruling.
Sure.
I agree.
The ARB is charged with interpreting or applying the guidelines that are set forth by City Council in all of the cases that come before them. From everything I've read and everything I've heard from Mr. Spence, it appears to me that they have done that. I have not heard anything else from the applicant as new information that would cause me to think otherwise. I don't see any compelling case for removal here. If I'm not mistaken, Ms. Shelton, if we vote to affirm the ARB's decision, then the applicant has the ability to either appeal this at circuit court
Yes,
or to put the property on the market for sale for a certain period of time.
for a reasonable price and determine whether or not they can obtain a buyer. And after that 12-month period of time, they have the right to tear the house down if they don't have a buyer for a reasonable price.
And who determines the reasonable price?
That's something that we have to look at.
Okay, but the city would work with the
Yes.
the property owners on that?
Certainly, it would be the appraisal price by a qualified appraiser.
Well, no, they don't have to try to rent it, they can just try to sell it, and if they can't sell it, then they can tear it down after a
Yes.
year.
Yes.
I
Your
move to,
motion?
I move to uphold the decision of the Architectural Review Board regarding ARB number 19-044 to deny the demolition of Bucktrout Cottage at 300 Bucktrout Lane for the reasons stated by the Architectural Review Board for their denial.
Second.
Ms. Burcham?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
This takes us to our last public hearing of the day, which is PCR 19-012, an ordinance to amend Article 1, Section 21-2, Article 3, District Regulations, and Article 4, Supplemental District Regulations of the Zoning Ordinance to change from food trucks to mobile food units. Sounds fascinating.
Back again with food trucks. At its 2019 General Assembly, they enacted Senate Bill 1425, which requires the city to update the zoning ordinance to meet the requirements of the bill. Basically, what you have before you today is proposed ordinance 19-17, which mainly removes food trucks and substitutes mobile food unit definition and updates the license requirements to meet the Senate Bill 1425. Planning Commission held a public hearing at their August meeting and recommended approval of proposed ordinance 19-17 by a vote of 6-0. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
No questions?
With that, we'll open the public hearing. Anybody who'd like to address council on this matter is encouraged to come forward. Seeing no one, we'll close the public hearing, come back to my colleagues for discussion.
I have a motion if everyone's.
I'm ready.
I think they're comfortable.
All right, Mr. Mayor, I move to approve proposed ordinance 19-17 as recommended by Planning Commission.
Second.
Ms. Burcham?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
That concludes our public hearings for today. The next section is reports. The first is a monthly financial statement. Mr. Trivett, anything you'd like to highlight?
You know, it's still very early in our fiscal year, but the financial statement is consistent with what we would expect for the city at this point. Did want to point out that we did see some return to normalcy for the Prince George Parking Garage revenue stream, which means that hopefully we've finally worked some of those kinks out. Thank you, Mr. Barham, and also to Mr. Dunn for working through this with us. If you have any questions, obviously Ms. Dameron is here to answer.
Questions? Okay. Monthly departmental operating reports.
They've been submitted for your review.
Any questions?
No.
Okay. City manager report.
None this month.
City attorney report.
Nothing.
Unfinished business.
None.
This takes us to new business. We have 4 items today. The first is consideration and approval of an award of $5,000 from the Tourism Promotion Contingency Fund to the Association for the Study of the Worldwide African Diaspora, or ASWAD. Mr. Witt, will you be handling this?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. The Tourism Promotion Contingency Fund was created in fiscal year 2015 It started with an availability of funding of $250,000 and was used for special events that draw increased visitation to the area. Where we are now, it's been refunded by City Council over various fiscal years. In this fiscal year 20, there's $150,000 allocated to this program. The city receives applications for this use. It's often called a just-in-time grant. This is for the programs and enhancements of special events that come along, often outside a normal budgetary process, which requires months or a year of advance notice. This application is for OSWAD, which you heard a detailed presentation of Monday, and the request is for $5,000 for them to enhance the film festival portion of this and bring Tim Reed here and other top draws for the film festival portion of that event. So staff recommends that City Council authorize the city manager to pay a $5,000 Tourism Promotion Contingency Fund grant to OSWAD for its November 2019 event.
Questions?
Just real quickly, Mr. Witt, I know we've heard this many times, but I figured it warrant, another reflection about it. So this, for any consideration of these funds, it's applied and it's considered by staff level committee, correct?
Yes, sir. There's a staff that's actually designated in your policy who that committee is. It's the city manager, the Parks and Rec director, the finance director, myself, the economic development director, and our special events permitting, Sandy.
Right, so for this application, we can move forward with that, with the film festival later on, the next one. But for this one, what was kind of some staff's thoughts and discussions about?
Sure. It's, as you heard Monday, this is a powerful event, bringing people from over 100 countries to experience Williamsburg. And so, as much as council said Monday, making this appealing to locals as well, and I mean, locals and Virginians and Americans, and not just worldwide. This film festival piece will really help with that, making it a draw for even more people to come.
So what was their original request?
Well, there was some talk. They originally they applied for the Tourism Development Grant Review process.
Oh, okay.
Back in, was that April? They were a Phase 1 applicant in that process. So that was March. They were a Phase 1 applicant. They were one of the 22 applications for those funds, for the tourism development funds, which are half of the Senate Bill 942 funds that return to the city. They were determined to not be eligible for that because it was a special event that fell more properly into this category, and so they were encouraged to apply for this funding source instead.
So final question, $5,000, what does it cover? Marketing costs?
It actually cost of the actual films and bringing the film talent to town.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you.
No questions.
I have no questions. I think we saw the presentation and felt it was compelling on Monday.
Comment?
No, so I think this is absolutely an appropriate funding application for the Tourism Contingency Fund. And I think the Grant Review Committee wisely made that decision, and staff, that this is the better allocate. This is, from these funds, should this grant be awarded. So I fully support this and look forward to a successful event.
It's a tremendous series of events over an extended period of time that brings an international audience to Williamsburg that otherwise would likely not come here, some of whom may not even know of Williamsburg. And for us to be able to assist something of this scale with a small grant that makes it better by bringing in the film director and the films, to me just makes perfect sense. And you think about what it would cost us in purchase media to try to get this scale of exposure to that same audience. It would be an extraordinary amount of money. So I'm fully in favor of this. Do I hear a motion?
I move that the City Council authorize the city manager to award $5,000 from the Tourism Promotion Contingency Budget to ASWAD, the Association for the Study of the Worldwide African Diaspora, thank you, November 2019 event consistent with the existing policy.
Second.
Ms. Burcham?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
Our next item for new business is consideration and approval of an award of $25,000 from the Tourism Promotion Contingency Fund to the William and Mary Global Film Festival. Back at you, Ms. DeWitt.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and members of council. I'm going to just kick this off briefly and then introduce the Global Film Festival producers, who you know, to you to speak and show you a PowerPoint. This is the exact same program as your prior action, and the Global Film Festival has seen significant growth over the past 4 years, and especially under the leadership of the current producers. And I will point out, last year, City Council provided a $25,000 fund or grant for marketing of this effort from this same grant fund pool. This year, the request is to be $25,000 again, but to be used to bring higher level talent and attractions in terms of film level, producer level, and Adam and Liz can talk more about this, but to have a higher level and caliber of film names, both people and films themselves, to attract people to the event. So staff recommends that this grant also be granted. And then I'm going to turn it over to, oh, go ahead.
If I may, just before you do that, I just want to clarify something. You said it's the exact same program. By that, you mean it's the exact same funding source?
Yes.
Because they both deal with film. I just want to make sure people understand this is an entirely different film program.
Yes, great clarification. This is part of the same Tourism Promotion Contingency Fund. That's the program I meant. So the same grant pool that funds can be requested.
So whereas the prior would be in November, this will be in February?
January, February.
January, okay.
So Adam Stackhouse and Liz Sykes of AVA Adventure are here to discuss this. This is their second year producing? Fourth year. It even says that in my memo. Fourth year producing this festival, and you'll see their growth. I'm sure they'll talk about it, has gone from 708 participants when they took over to almost 2,500 this past year. So it's quite a trajectory that they're very, very proud of. So with no further ado, here are the experts.
Hi, thanks for having us here today. We should be, there we go. As you mentioned, I'm Adam, this is Liz. We are in our fourth year of producing the festival, our second year coming to you all as producers of the festival, looking for city support. The festival takes place in what we would say were quiet tourism winter months of Williamsburg. The 2020 festival will take place January 30th to February 2, 2020. It's a 4-day winter arts event. We look at it both as a destination tourism event, bringing people from out of town to experience these programs, stay overnight, spend money at local businesses, and as a town gown opportunity with heavy involvement from local organizations, citizens, and students and faculty at the college. Very happy with the programming we've had over the past several years. It includes not only feature films, but short film programs. We bring special guests to town, filmmakers, performers, actors. Workshops are offered, free events that involve the filmmaking guests, and alumni from William & Mary who are working in the entertainment industry that are open to all. And there's receptions that allow attendees the chance to mix and mingle with the festival special guests that come to town. The images on this slide represent 4 programs from last year. Of particular note, we had films including 2 that went on to be nominated for Academy Awards, a documentary where we brought the Academy Award nominated filmmaker-director Nathaniel Kahn to town for a Q&A following his program, and another one, Charm City, that involved the attendance of Burke Brownfeld, a consulting producer on the film that was also shortlisted for an Academy Award. So having these high-caliber programs that are not yet available to see on, they didn't come to the theater in Williamsburg or have not been released on streaming platforms, that are real gets and exclusives to the festival, have been really exciting, and we hope to increase that as we continue.
So as Michelle mentioned, this will be our 4th year producing the event, and since taking over the production of the festival, our focus has really been expanding it into a town gown event, making it a destination tourism event for people in the region. And to do that, we've been expanding the programming, expanding alumni engagement, so having more alumni come back to offer workshops, which are networking opportunities that are open both to community members and students. And this past year, we added a 3rd venue, Tucker Theater, on William & Mary campus that featured content that all had a William and Mary connection, whether it was current students, alumni, faculty members, and all of that programming was free to attend. So the addition of the third venue and the city's sponsorship dollars last year really helped increase attendance. As you can see, 2019 was a big jump from 2018 in terms of attendance numbers. In 2018, all William and Mary students were able to attend programming for free, which hugely increased student involvement in the programs. We continued that into 2019, and we continued offering the workshops, which have been very popular both among community members and current students.
And we come to you looking for continued city support because the sponsorship the city provided last year and could for the 2020 festival makes an absolutely enormous impact on the quality of programming we're able to provide and bring to the city. The overall, I should say here, our event sponsors here, this represents a list of the sponsors that were attached to the previous year's festival, many of whom have already signed on for the 2020 festival. With the city's involvement, we're really looking at the city as a keynote sponsor of the festival who is able to provide the continued momentum that we've seen over the past 4 years. We've really been able to bring more and more programming, bring more and more people, and this funding would really be that shot of adrenaline that allows us to target some big names, some big films, and bring them to town to hopefully keep growing the festival into making it a very stable annual program moving forward.
Moving forward to continue expanding and growing the event, we want to continue our partnerships, working with the Hotel and Motel Association to make sure attendees know there are deals offered for festival attendees, working with the Restaurant Association to offer discounts to festival attendees, to really make sure that they know, in addition to all the programming that is happening at the festival, there are many things in the Williamsburg area they can enjoy while they're here for the films and arts programming. Continuing our community outreach with the Youth Filmmaking Institute that's offered every fall for middle school students at the William and Mary Media Center, and of course our alumni engagement, bringing them back to Williamsburg to showcase their professional expertise and connect them with current students and community members.
And with that, we're open to any questions you have.
No questions other than just a general comment about, I'm very happy and excited to see that you've seen attendance grow and the programming is expanding. For me, this is just another hook in the Williamsburg destination draw. And so I look forward to supporting you and hope that you all will continue to grow and bring bigger names and bigger films in the future. More people.
Thanks for coming in, and just to echo what the Vice Mayor said, I completely agree wholeheartedly. In terms of the future, where do you guys see the city's involvement? Will you continue to request $25,000 from the city and maybe use it for sponsorships or for ticketing or for something? Or, how do you envision us as a keynote partner in the future with your efforts? Obviously, we want to see you guys succeed and expand and whatnot, but.
Yes, well, thank you. We really appreciate the support, and we do foresee continuing to ask for funding for the next few years as we continue to grow the festival. A big focus of the festival is making it accessible to community members, so for that reason, many of the programs are offered for free, $5 or $10. So $10 is the price of a movie in most theaters, or maybe a little cheaper than movies in most theaters. But for that price, you can come see a movie that's not yet in theaters with a special guest. So we think that's really a huge deal for people that come to the festival. And again, the motivation behind that is making sure it's accessible to the community and a draw for people to come. So we would like to keep offering programs at that level, and to do that and continue to attract guests that are a draw, films that are not yet released, we do need additional funding support for the next few years.
Thank you.
Well, I have a couple questions, but also a couple comments. I'm just hopefully okay to throw them all into one. So as far as your marketing plan, do you plan on utilizing sort of the same thing as last year, or do you have some tweaks to that so that you can to try to expand the reach of the festival?
We did expand marketing last year to involve throughout the state, up to the DC area. And we're looking to do a lot of similar outreach through newspaper publications, social media, print ads. In talking with the Hotel and Motel Association, we've already discussed, last year we did an experimental targeting campaign in Southwest Virginia. And this year we've talked about looking somewhere else with approximately a 3 to 4 hour commute from Williamsburg to see, if certain targeted phone-driven ads are useful for bringing people in a very specific package. We're also looking to expand the tourism package deals. Last year we had a lot of partnerships with local hotels that offered discounts to people who came for the festival. This year we're looking into the possibilities of bundling that. So there's one transaction online, they get their hotel, they get a pass, they might get a meal voucher for restaurants in the downtown area. So we're looking to expand more tourism package stuff overall too.
And by doing it that way, you would have a tracking mechanism to determine where the people are coming from, I would assume.
Absolutely. In our event report from the previous year's festival, which I think you all saw, there were some metrics about cities that we had through some of the ticket purchases and hotel room numbers and whatnot for things that we could track for people coming from afar. But this will just be another way that we can get that statistic coming in.
Well, as Mayor Freiling has commented in previous times when you all have been here, I'm a strong proponent of the Global Film Festival and have been going for the past number of years, and so I'm glad to see you all expand. And a couple sort of peripheral comments is that I went to a number of the films, and it was interesting to read an article in the New York Times about one of the films that I had never heard of until it was presented there. And I went to a couple that were the Oscar nominees. And sort of a carryover or a sort of compounding effort was hearing some of the alumni who come back for the workshops and to be special guests, and their recognition that Williamsburg overall has changed and there's a lot more for them to do. So I think it also shows a new Williamsburg to them with the thought that they might come back for other reasons and opportunities. And I'm glad to support this through the Tourism Contingency Fund, but I do want it to be known that there might not every year be this amount of money in that fund. So I would suggest that as you all continue to expand and hope to continue well into the future, that you might check with Michelle or the city manager on other funding options for you.
A couple questions. So have you been talking to Terry and Vicky at the Chamber and Tourism Councils?
For the 19 festival, we talked to the Tourism and Chamber, but not yet for the 2020. But we will.
I think especially with our new leaders there, it's important that they become part of this.
Absolutely.
And then last year we talked about partnering with like sports marketing. Anything you've been able to do with that in terms of sports marketing events? So we know we've got 2 basketball games during your time slot there.
We have worked with Tribe Athletics on other events, and we do regular marketing outreach through campus venues. We haven't had a specific like basketball-related promotion to the festival, but that's something we can explore for the 2020 event, sure.
And there should be plenty of seats available if the students aren't here. What about Muscarelli? What's their involvement going to be this year compared to last? Because they're sort of in transition, aren't they?
They are, yes, and we're meeting with them later this month, so we hope they will continue to sponsor at the same level. Last year they made a cash contribution and also sponsored a program. So to be determined for 2020.
And then any involvement by James City County or York County?
Not with the festival, no. We've focused mainly within the city limits as far as involvement. I believe restaurants that might be involved with the Williamsburg Area Restaurant Association might have been extended the deal that came through that organization to offer a discount, but a lot of the efforts have been resulting around the downtown area as the festival is based out of the Kimball Theater.
Okay, thank you.
Just a couple comments. Yes, Ms. Ramsey, you're a great proponent of this program, but I've heard from others in the community too, how much they greatly enjoy the film festival. And our intent last year was to grant the money and help in the hope that It would help you with the marketing to increase the attendance. We've seen some increase in the attendance. I'm sure there's some folks who say, is it really worth $25,000 to get those extra 900 attendees, 200 or so, which are free tickets to students? And the thing I would say is, it comes at a time of very, very low demand in this community when each incremental piece of business is precious to those restaurant and hotel operators. And just helping them keep the doors open in a difficult time is really important. But on top of that, there's an incredibly strong local appetite for film. And we've heard that over and over again, and that's only been reinforced with the closure of the Kimball Theater. And while you're here for a wonderful 4 days, it's only 4 days, but it's something that, it's a real benefit to the residents of this community. It's a partnership with many different aspects of the college. And to the point that you all made earlier, it's another way to help influence people in understanding that Williamsburg is about history and a lot more. And this is one particular aspect that I think can grow. Again, to Ms. Ramsey's point, this fund is designed to help new events get started or current events expand. We know it takes a couple of years or few years for events to really take hold. But at some point, this fund won't be available for this purpose. So, as she said, talk to Ms. DeWitt, Mr. Trivett about outside agency funding or some other way that the city can participate, or come up with a new dynamic expanded element that we can discreetly fund. And that might be another approach.
And to all of that, these types of activities that you bring, like Summer Breeze concert series and cultural events that happen in the area, don't happen without public support. I mean, we can't forget that. And I think we as a community we enjoy having this here, and we have to understand that there has to be some support of this nature. And so, Mr. Freiling's right. This fund particularly is designed to help things get off the ground. Don't let that be, a deterrent from coming back with something new and exciting next year. We want to see things like this continue to grow because I think the residents of Williamsburg enjoy them. So, makes us who we are.
Would you like to make a motion?
I will. I move that the City Council authorize the city manager to award $25,000 from the Tourism Promotion Contingency Budget to the William and Mary Global Film Festival, consistent with the existing policy.
Second.
Ms. Burcham?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
The next item of new business is consideration of proposed resolution 19-14 authorizing the city manager to apply for FY 21-22 VDOT revenue sharing program funds. Welcome, Mr. Small.
Howdy, sir. Mayor, members of council.
Howdy, Mr. Small.
What did I do? Fix it. Mayor and members of council, for your consideration is the biennial request to apply for VDOT revenue sharing funds. The revenue sharing program provides approximately $100 million per year in state aid funding for local projects, not just Williamsburg, but all over the state, and requires a 50% local match for competitive grants. The two projects that we are looking for being requested, one is a drainage outfall channel stabilization project off of Capitalatic Road, and the second is for maintenance resurfacing. The drainage project is listed in the FY20 CIP, and it was originally intended to be funded through the DEQ Stormwater Local Assistance Fund program, but it was not selected. So the $205,875 in revenue sharing funds would allow the project to begin the design in FY21. The second project is a request for additional funds to advance the city's anticipated paving schedule. Currently, $475,000 per year is scheduled in the CIP for roadway resurfacing. The $950,000 in revenue sharing funds would allow us to double the pace and complete 4 years worth of paving in 2 years. In your packet is a resolution supporting these applications, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions you may have about the proposed projects or the revenue sharing application.
So it makes sense to file for grants to see if we can't get some additional money to help offset some of these expenses. With the first project, what happens if we don't get it? will we continue, if we have a problem, are we just going to have to support it ourselves?
We could either support it ourselves, or, as always, I'm gonna continue, just like when we didn't get this DEQ stormwater funds, I was applying for the revenue sharing funds, I'm always looking for other opportunities out there. And I'll just continue.
And if we continue to push it back and apply for other grants, are we leaving this in a situation that it has a significant detriment to the environment?
Right, it's taken a while for this particular problem to develop. I think it's fairly stable, and that's why I'm not pushing that we fix it immediately with city funds.
Thank you.
That's why I think it's okay, we're still okay to try to get these other funds to help fix the problem.
So just to be completely clear, from a DEQ standpoint, we're not falling into any issues with like more pollutants that are, coming into the, increased erosion that's going through the drainage system or something to the.
It's no
Chesapeake
more
Bay
than what's,
watershed.
quote, normal.
Okay.
And what we would do is, with the funds, though, we would be able to help offset some of the reductions that we're required to as part of our Chesapeake Bay TMDL.
I'm surprised the DEQ didn't issue a grant. I figured that would be something that they would want to support.
It's also a competitive grant program,
Sure.
and other projects scored higher than ours.
Sure. Thank you.
I have no additional questions.
I know these are exciting projects for Public Works. But in terms of making your application more competitive, is there things that help in terms of you sell it, or getting support from our state representatives?
Not really. When it comes down to a lot of these projects, they're really now scored, a lot of these highway VDOT applications are scored very objectively. So what they do is they look at what's your cost for your request for the project, what's the benefit of it, when sometimes was the last time you were funded, and then how much money's available. For revenue sharing, they typically like to fund the construction projects first. And if you've already got revenue sharing on the project, they will fund those as tier 1. If you're a new construction project, which is our drainage project, that's tier 2. And then the maintenance projects end up being in tier 3. Last year, they only funded the tier 2 projects, and even those weren't fully funded.
Thank you.
So we have a schedule of paving that we follow that is a rotation.
It's a generalized rotation, but it's always constantly being evaluated based on weather conditions and traffic volumes.
There's a need-based aspect to it because some
Yes.
roads get more traffic and conditions can be harsher for certain areas. What's the advantage of doing 4 years worth of paving in 2 other than just because we could? I mean, how competitive is that going to be?
Well, what makes it
we
not
have a
competitive
backlog.
is
Let me
more
ask-
the fact that yes, it does help, but the maintenance, those have the lowest chance of getting funded. So if you were to ask me what percentage we have a chance of getting that particular project, I'd say it's fairly low. We have received it in the past. About 3 or 4 years ago, we actually used the revenue sharing money, and we had a large paving schedule that year. So we were able to finally catch up. We've fallen somewhat behind because we did not have a paving schedule this last spring. And so what we're doing is we want to make sure that we try to get those projects done. And if you don't do them, the roads just keep getting bad.
So we do have a bit of a backlog, but not one that you're overly concerned about at this point?
We have a bit of a backlog that I'm concerned enough that I'm looking for funding.
Other questions? Your motion?
I move that City Council approve Resolution 19-14 concerning the FY 21-22 VDOT Revenue Sharing Program.
Second.
Ms. Burcham?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
The last item under new business today is appointments to boards and commissions. Mr. Trivett?
Yes, I think actually we'd like to do closed session before we do the boards and appointments.
Okay. This takes us to the open forum section of today's meeting. Anybody who'd like to address council on any matter is welcome to come forward. As you may have heard before, we do ask that you state your name and address and keep your comments to 5 minutes or less. Welcome.
Hello. Mr. Mayor, I tried to email you, so I don't know if you got it or not. I tried to email you. The reason why I was coming today,
Okay.
I didn't know if you got it or not, but I have a handout of why to give to everybody. My name is Juliet Wright, and I live at 805 North Henry Street. And I'm here because I have a situation regarding my home that I live with at 805 North Henry Street. And that packet explains some of the details about what my health problems are and what brings me here. Over the past 2 years, I've been asking different organizations to help me to get a back door to my home. My home is over 50 years old. It was moved from Colonial Williamsburg when York County owned it, and it only has 2 front doors. It doesn't have a back door at all, and that poses a danger to me to be able to get out of my home. It's a 2-bedroom rancher that I have, and I've asked for assistance from Independent Living, Community Action Agency, Hampton Roads Mobility, Housing Partnership here, my local service, social services, my social worker, and another social worker. And then I was told to call the City of Williamsburg Housing Authority. I've honestly tried to get people to help me. Every time I ask for assistance, they automatically tell me I need to go to contact Housing Partnership. But every time I ask Housing Partnership for anything, they tell me that they can't do anything to help me because the City of Williamsburg doesn't give them any money. Especially a couple months ago when my plumbing, I didn't have plumbing for 4 days, but the city guys came out and fixed it, and it was on the city's end. But I was told to go call my social worker to see if my social worker can get me help. They just won't help me at all. But every time I ask one of the disability organizations, they always tell me that I have to go back to my local housing authority where I live. And I've contacted Independent Living recently. They've called me to ask me about it. And they said that they keep telling me to go back to the Housing Authority or Housing Partnership, and they can't help me. And so now I'm appealing to you all to see if there's any way that you can help me. I do get Medicaid. I do get $5,000 a year. They said if I can get a contractor to help me, which I did ask Housing Partnership, if they would do it at a charity level, and if the city council would waive the fees that would be for the inspections and for the building permit, and they would do it at a charity level, then I can get my house expanded by the 5 feet to be able to get my back door put onto my house. My house is only 740 square feet. I'm constantly in the hospital. I have POTS, and I have dysautonomia, and I have severe asthma. When I'm back and forth in the hospital and I get home, the only place I can go is my living room, right in my chair. I can't go in my bathroom. It's not accessible for me to get in with my walker. I have to turn. It's not even accessible for me to get into my bedroom. The doors are just not big enough for me to get up in there. So I sleep in my living room on my couch. That's the only thing I can do. And so I'm just asking to see, it's my sincere hope that maybe that you all can look into it and provide me with some assistance. I have asked my local representatives in this area. They've said that they would try to help me, and it's been over 1.5 years since I've called them, but they haven't gotten back with me with anybody, any contractor, anybody that can help me. And so that's why I'm appealing to you all today.
Thank you, Ms. Wright. If you'd be kind enough to give us a few minutes, if you could have a seat, and then let us talk to you after this meeting.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would anybody else like to address council? Seeing no one, I'll close the open forum. I believe we have something for closed session.
Yes, sir, we do. We have 2. I move to go into closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussing 1, personnel matters, subparagraph 1, concerning appointments to boards and commissions, And one matter involving the discussion of an award of public contract involving the expenditure of public funds, including interviews of bidders or offerers, and discussion of terms and scope of such contract, where discussion in open session would adversely affect the bargaining position of negotiating strategies of the public body.
Yes, we do need a second for that.
Second.
Ms. Bertram?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
Council will take a brief recess before reconvening in closed session.